And now we have to move forward. It is my privilege to introduce the next phase of this program. So I move into the question and answer session, and I will invite now Judge Emeritus Zamit McCain, the Ombudsman in Malta, to moderate this part.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't wish this part of the program to be a monologue, please. We have very competent people around us. We have people from university. 2 particular faculties are present here with their students. We have permanent secretaries of top quality with us. We have heads of department. So you must have questions to put to such an eminent speaker with such vast experience, both in the UK and abroad. Please, if there is anyone who wishes to put a question, I ask him to identify himself for the benefit of all and for who's following us from home, in order to put his question concisely, clearly, as much as possible. Thank you. Auditor General, Mr. Charles Zaguara, your question.
Thank you so much for your inspiring speech. I think the passion with which you do your work is evident for all to see. So thank you so very much. Thank you to the Ombudsman and to the Honourable Speaker for making this happen. So I have served as Auditor General for 8 years now, and within the office for 16 years. And you made reference to a very important point, I think, the fact that the Ombudsman has no executive power. Even in my case, I do not have any executive power. I don't think that I should have, to be honest. But we do try to estimate how many of our recommendations are being taken on board, because that shows, at the end of the day, how effective our office is. So every 2 years, we issue 2 follow-up audit assignments to estimate, and data indicates that about 80–85% of our recommendations are being taken on board. I have to say that some years back, the Office of the Principal Permanent Secretary even issued its own governance report that practically estimates the same thing. Now the question is this. I have to emphasize, my view is that both the Ombudsman as well as the Auditor General, in a way, should act as a medical practitioner. So we examine the patient, we see whether there is any weakness, any sickness, and we prescribe the medicine. Now it's up to the patient to take the medicine or not. Obviously, if the patient doesn't take the medicine, it is the entity that suffers, not the doctor. So I am asked many times by the media, by other stakeholders, but why do you not insist that you have executive powers? Because in that way, your office may be more effective. Can you please go into this issue? Because although I personally think that we should not have executive power, I have to admit with you that sometimes I am not so sure when asked with this question. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much for that. And I want to be frank with you that occasionally I do wonder the same thing. This is not a competition, but about 97% of our compliance recommendations are accepted by bodies in jurisdiction. Sometimes graciously, sometimes having to be dragged to compliance by the threat of publicity and so on, but mostly it happens. The problem is when it's a very big case and the government decides that it doesn't want to implement the recommendation. What do you do then? And as things stand, all we have is the power of publicity. And unless a parliamentary select committee is prepared to come up and cross-examine the department, then not a lot is going to happen. Unless there is a media campaign. I don't know whether you've seen in the UK, there's a case of a post office where actually post office managers have been accused of fraud, and many went to prison or were convicted in the courts. And it's only very recently that it's been recognized to be inappropriate and incorrect. And it's actually the power of a television program which has forced the government to engage in more rapid approach to compensation. But I bring you the case of South Africa, where the public protector has binding powers, and what that has done has meant that there has been a legalization of the Ombudsman process, in which when she has made recommendations and instructions on bodies to institute recommendations which she has proposed, bodies in jurisdiction have gone to the courts and raised concerns and complaints, and that's led to millions of rand being spent on litigation which is not really to the benefit of anybody. And unfortunately, the public protector in South Africa was impeached by Parliament because she didn't do the job properly, and she reflected bias in the way in which she used her binding powers. But the test is what it does to the public, and the public have been outraged by the use of public money by an institution which should be representing them, and ended up defending the public protector in a way which was not very dignified. So what I'm saying is there's no easy solution to this. It would be better if there was authority and consensus. Sometimes that's not going to happen, and then you have to decide what to do. But I, like you, would be very, very cautious about making my office having the power to tell people what to do.
Next question, I have behind me Dr. Mario Thomas Vassallo, who is Dean of the Faculty of Public Policy and Politics at the University of Malta. I give the floor to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Malta Ombudsman. Thank you, UK.
Share the microphone, actually.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. Thank you for this morning. I have prepared my presentation so as not to take long. I don't have a question. I have an appeal. Thank you for this inspiring and thought-provoking event this morning. And as head of Department of Public Policy at the University of Malta, I could relate to all the ideas and concepts that you have expressed this morning, because they are the same concerns and challenges that we discuss with our students every single day on campus. In a state where kollox politika, in a state where everything is politics, and partisan politics often leads public discourse in the village square and on social media, as a citizen, as an academic, I cannot make peace with the lack of appropriate political education we have in Malta. We have been among the first from this House to give the right to 16-year-olds to vote. And we have been the first and the unique, and hopefully the only, to assign the role of mayor to a 16, 17-year-old. However, we have remained in total darkness in terms of political literacy, policy design, and public management acumen. My department, the Department of Public Policy, has already prepared a researched proposition to introduce politics and governance as a new intermediate post-secondary subject, not excluding secondary school. Up to now, the only political education is one TV owned by Malta Labour Party, by Partit Laburista, and net television and radio owned by Partit Nazzjonalista. So you can imagine this country, 500,000 people, where political education is simply non-existent and only dependent on party media, political party media. We cannot sustain democracy without political education. The work of the Ombudsman could become even more cumbersome, more than it is, and problematic, unless we truly commit ourselves to invest in political literacy and the nurturing of good governance. My appeal, given the privilege of a parliamentary seat just for 2 hours, may I take this opportunity to once again appeal to politicians and decision makers to unite behind this urgent call more than ever to introduce a systematic and wide-ranging approach to ascertain political education among the younger Maltese generation, in the hope that the Ombudsman of tomorrow would have a slightly less stressful job than today. Long live integrity.
Thank you very much. I agree with everything that you've said. What I want to say is I was brought up in the thrall of Michael Oakeshott, who wrote a book called Rationalism in Politics. In 1962, he was at the London School of Economics, and he wrote a chapter called Political Education, in which he said that the point of a conversation is that there's no point. It's to understand each other's arguments so that we can better appreciate them. And we need that more and more as the world becomes more complex. So I agree with you. I have done quite a lot to encourage schools to come to my office, to spend time with me and my staff, to give them internships at the age of, say, 15, so that they get an appreciation of what an ombudsman is. I went to one inner city school which was 97% ethnic minority populated. And I met the parents, and none of the parents knew what an ombudsman was, and they all wanted their children to be either lawyers or accountants or doctors. And they had no concept of what an ombudsman was. And then when the boys came to my office and spent the day with me, they got rid of their teacher. They were 15-year-olds. They sat around the table with me. They got rid of their teacher, and they said, we want to talk to you about some issues. And I thought, well, we're going to talk about integrity, independence. No. How much do you earn, Rob? That was the question. Is it 6 figures? You know, that is the kind of culture which we're having to deal with. And if universities and schools and ministries of education don't get hold of this, then we're going to be in very serious trouble. So I agree with you absolutely. And I commend your university for doing the things it's doing to promote the concept.
Thank you very much, Rob. Thank you very much, Dean. Another dean of another faculty of our university, Dr. Ivan Mifsud, Dean of the Faculty of Laws of our university. Ivan?
Speak. Okay, speak. Thank you very much. Mr. Behrens, I followed your speech with a lot of interest. I can tell you that I started my career with the Parliamentary Ombudsman. I was very young. I was an investigating officer. And even though I moved into academia, in fact, when I moved into academia, I took Ombudsman with me and Ombudsman studies, etc. And now I'm at the other end, because the Ombudsman investigates us as well, which is a very good thing as well. And I have a lot of questions for you, but I'm going to restrict myself to one particular question. One thing which struck me, and which even Judge Zammit McKeon, our Maltese Ombudsman, mentioned, the lack of powers of the Ombudsman. Now, at the same time, you said that you wouldn't like to be like South Africa with executive powers. So I'm presuming you're not referring to the fact that you don't have executive powers. So when you mention lack of powers, what are you referring to, please? Thank you very much.
It's very nice to meet a gamekeeper who's become a poacher. And, I'm sure you better understand the issues now. And thank you for your question. There are significant things that I need that are not, my legislation is not in compliance with the Venice Principles about. And I have campaigned for that in the last 7 years. We nearly got the legislation in 2016, but there was something called the referendum on EU membership. There was then Brexit, then COVID, and it didn't happen. First of all, you've got own initiative powers so that people who can't complain can have cases investigated without them having to come to us. And if I'd had those powers, I could have saved lives and saved huge unhappiness across the country. And what I found from this survey was that countries that had an ombudsman with own initiative powers were able to investigate things that went wrong during COVID much more quickly than those that didn't. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is to get rid of the MP filter, which is an outrage, okay? The third thing is, unlike you, we have no joined up national ombudsman scheme in the UK. So we have a series of public service ombudsmen who deal separately with higher education, policing, housing, local government, social care, and then we have my office, which combines national government. Now, how can we expect people to understand where to go to if there's so many competing schemes that they don't know where to go? And at least 50% of the time of my intake team is spent on telling people they've come to the wrong place and advising them where to go. Now, according to Bernard Jenkin, the MP who is the chair of the Select Committee, that is a public service that we're performing, and I accept that. But I'd rather it was clearer with one joined-up scheme, and that would make it much simpler. The final thing, which is outrageous, is that 2 years ago, the government introduced what it called safe space in the National Health Service through legislation, which was an attempt, an honourable attempt, to allow clinicians to disclose what had really happened in an incident without being held accountable for it. and to do that without being engaged in an investigation. And what they said was that I would only be able to look at those cases with the approval of the High Court. Now, the Venice Principles say absolutely that that is a diminution of my power to look at public administration in general. I took my case to the Venice Commission, I argued it, they unanimously agreed that I was right, that the Ombudsman had been introduced in this way, and the government said, we understand the position, but we're not prepared to do anything about it. So in those cases, it would concretely help citizens if we could change the rules to make the mandate easier to be more impactful for the Ombudsman. But what I never want to do is to lie back and say, help me, you know, we don't have enough power. We have a lot of power in terms of our authority, our resources, things that most ombudsmen don't have. And we have a wonderful cadre of people who go to the very limits to do it. I think the last point I would make on this, we don't have human rights powers, but we deal with human rights cases on a daily basis. You know, the Windrush case is a good example of that. That's about the violation of people's fundamental rights. It didn't stop us looking at it. So hopefully that's a concrete answer to you.
I pass the floor to Chief Justice Emeritus Vincent De Gaetano, Commissioner for Education at the Office of the Malta Parliamentary Ombudsman. Judge De Gaetano.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Ombudsman, thank you very much, Mr. Behrens, for that lectio magistralis, if I can call it so. I was struck by something you said in connection with judicial review in your country, where you said the courts came down against some rules about women withdrawing state pensions or something to that effect. Now, that struck a note because, as we all know, most of us know, there is no fundamental human right to a pension as such. Yet there is now, in the European context, a fundamental right not to be discriminated in the enjoyment of any right, not simply in the enjoyment of a fundamental right. Now, I know that your country, the United Kingdom, has not signed, neither signed nor ratified Protocol number 12. But Malta signed and ratified Protocol number 12 about more than almost 8 years ago now. And yet it has not been transposed into the European Convention Act. We have transposed into the European Convention Act all the protocols that Malta has signed and ratified. But as we all know, Protocol number 12 speaks about discrimination in the enjoyment of ordinary rights, not fundamental rights. I was wondering, how do issues of discrimination in the enjoyment of ordinary rights come to the attention of your office, if at all? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for that very good question, and for your time yesterday. Appreciate it. So, just on the women's state pensions case first, this is a very big case involving significant numbers of people, and it's not yet concluded. So I can't talk in detail about that because we have to investigate in private. But what I will say about it is that we hope very soon to make a decision. The courts have already ruled in this case that the government did not act illegally in the way in which it behaved. So the issue for us has been whether or not there was maladministration of a non-legal kind as far as this was concerned. So it's more nuanced than whether or not people had a fundamental right in that sense. I gave evidence to a select committee last year, the Justice Select Committee, in which they asked me whether or not we should have a human rights ombudsman in the UK, because I don't have that formal power. And my answer was very clear. We've got more than enough ombudsmen in the UK without creating another one. What we need to do simply is to amend the powers of the National Ombudsman to allow for a consideration of those human rights. But even if we don't, we run training for our staff to identify the rights that may be impacted in cases in a way which enables a focus on human rights. And we learnt about that from the Northern Irish Ombudsman, who used the same legislation really to take forward human rights issues. And we managed to do that and to point out to people who may not see it as a human right. You know, in disability cases in hospital, for example, people don't necessarily talk about their human rights. They talk about the horrid experience they've been through as a result of their treatment in mental health cases. So we have to draw that out. But the fundamental thing and the difference between us and a court is that we cannot say there has been an illegal act. We can only say we believe that there may be a case for believing that an illegal act has taken place in this respect. So we can draw that to the attention of other people. We can't make a fundamental finding on it ourselves.
Thank you. I pass the floor to Deputy Speaker, the Honourable David Ajus.
Thank you very much. It's an honor for me that in this House we have today such an important number of personalities. And allow me, Mr. Speaker, to ask two questions. First one is, what do you think is the correct or the amount of time that should be taken by an ombudsman and an office of the ombudsman from the day that someone, that a normal citizen, files a complaint till the actual day when there's a conclusion? And my second one is, should Parliament, where we are today, debate those cases where there's a conclusion by the office of the Ombudsman and there's no decision as yet, or no feedback as yet, or no execution by the government? Should Parliament have time and allocated a dedicated Parliament sitting where these particular instances are debated by the members of Parliament? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Two good questions, two quick answers. How long is a piece of string? I mean, it depends on what the complaint is and how complicated it is, rather than specifying the amount of time that you spend on it. So we do our very best to try and ensure that we don't need an investigation right up front, and we can resolve it in a way which we call early resolution. And in the vast majority of those 35,000 cases, we resolve it quickly within a matter of days without it going to an investigation. If it is complex, and deaths in the health service are very complex, because we need to commission independent advice from clinicians in perhaps 3 or 4 different specialisms, and we have to give people the right to see that and to comment on it. We produce draft recommendations for people to look at. It could take many months, and in some cases years, in order to do it effectively. And we do our very best to advise people how much time it's going to take given the complexity of the issues. And you need to do that by constantly communicating with people about what's going on, about how long the case is going to take. In the COVID situation, we've had a backlog of cases. We had to close the office for 4 months because hospitals closed down their complaints department and put people into bereavement counselling. And so we weren't able to continue looking at health cases for 4 months. That led to a backlog. And so we've had to explain to people that there will be a number of weeks, sometimes months, in the last 2 years before we could actually begin an investigation. And I think given the national crisis, that is acceptable. But it's not acceptable if you delay, if you allow bodies in jurisdiction to take extra time to try and push it into the long grass. You have to actively seek to resolve cases, and we set ourselves benchmarks about what an average case time would look like, which Parliament constantly reminds us about and looks at. So it's about constant dialogue with the complainants and not allowing the body in jurisdiction to push it into the long grass.
Was the first answer.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, but I think Honourable Ajus is very eager on the second one. That's what, at least, the impression I got.
Thank you very much for that. So, I apologise. Look, I personally believe that Parliament has a crucial role to play in addressing non-compliance, where the Ombudsman has no binding power. And if Parliament doesn't do that, it does a disservice to accountability in the country. It means that non-compliance can be got away with by departments and health services, and that's an incentive to hold out against complying. My Parliament, through the Select Committee, does look at these issues. I would like them to look at it more. They don't always look at at cases we lay before Parliament. But I think there is an importance in Parliament debating non-compliance so that people think very carefully before they don't comply. What do you think?
I think together with Mr. Speaker, we had started to talk about this subject, that in Parliament, yes, we need to have a session that we will debate such matters, yes. That's my personal opinion, and I think it should
I mentioned that in my speech earlier.
Okay.
No, okay.
I have another question, this time from Miss Amy Malia from the British High Commission. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
So my question is directed at both of you. You both spoke of the challenges of your job and somewhat of the limitations. What would you say
Ms. Malia, please raise your voice.
Sorry, I'm a soft-spoken
It won't be a problem,
person.
you know, just raise your voice, that's all.
Okay, sorry, I'm a soft-spoken person by nature. What would you say are the biggest areas for improvement in your job? And do you feel you could be better supported by your respective states?
You said?
Improvement, yes.
Through the initiatives of the ombudspersons, you mean, what this has brought about in real terms as improvements. This is your question, no?
Yes.
So,
Actually, excuse me.
and the second part was?
And do you feel like you could be better supported by in your respective states?
Thank you very much. Are you asking what has improved or what should be improved?
What should be improved?
Yeah. Thank you. The big improvement is the way in which we handle data. And that is a key issue for ombudsmen around the world. The arrival of artificial intelligence creates huge opportunities to improve the speed and intelligence we have about trends and about what people are thinking about. And we have just appointed a new chief of data and technology to try and accelerate the huge amount of evidence that we get about what people are bringing to us and to try and address those issues. And we haven't got near it yet. And there's lots to learn. In Estonia, for example, they have it all online. They're leading training in artificial intelligence, and we're well behind that. So I think that is a big area of improvement, which we need. The second thing is, if I'm frank, the Ombudsman of Austria has a public recognition rate of 70%, 70. My public recognition rate is 17%, 17%. Now, is that because I'm boring and she is not? I don't think so. I hope not. It's because of the structural position of the Ombudsman in the UK being part of a whole bevy of Ombudsman schemes where it's very difficult to sort out who's who. So we need to do that. Now, does the state support us? Was that your second question?
Sort of. It's more along the lines of how can they better support you?
Okay. So I have regular meetings with ministers to address the issues of concern that I raise before them. And I always get a hearing from both ministers and officials, which I'm grateful for. And relations are not bad on an interpersonal level. But where you have a situation of being promised ombudsman reform to improve the powers of the institution for 10 years, and where select committees have been saying for 20 years we need ombudsman reform, and it doesn't happen, then to my mind, that is hugely disappointing and something that I should not remain quiet about. So we need to be more in line with the Venice Principles, which were signed up with the full support of the United Kingdom government, and they even supported the United Nations General Assembly recommendation to endorse them. That's good, that's excellent. We now need to see the legislation which would implement that support.
I believe, Amy, you want me to answer, or no?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
First reaction is this. Whether the country knows about the Ombudsman, I can assure you that the country knows about the Ombudsman. And at a very high rate. Now that raises the profile. And that raises the expectations, all just the same. Now how do we do this? By a day-to-day action. That is why I emphasized in my presentation the day-to-day approach. Not a 9-to-5 approach. My office, just for your information, starts at 6:30 in the morning. It is a 7-day operation, as far as I'm concerned, among other matters. Now, by doing so, you raise to perfection the outreach approach. And the outreach approach is very important. You instill faith in people, you instill the approach in people, and even in a simple radio program, you try to console people. And console not just for consolation's sake, but for being active about it. That's the first thing. Second thing, improvement. Where would you like to see improvement? In these 9 months that I have been in office, as far as my recipients on the public administration point of view, they are all here. A lot of them are here. I've seen a very proactive approach. I've said it, resaid it, and will continue to say it. Does it mean that there isn't improvement that should be there? Of course that should be. My appeal is for the permanent secretaries who are doing a splendid job in the various departments and these ministries they have, to instill faith in their liaison officers who are also present today, and give them the instruments to be effective in the way they reply to the Ombudsman. The office is not a competitive body. It is there to help give voice to people. I will not, for the next 5 years, you will hear me repeating this, giving voice to people and resolving their problems. The Ombudsman by himself, he can't do it. He needs the public administration. My appeal is for the public administration in its various facets, especially where you have the authorities. Some CEOs from the authorities are also here. Please open up your ears on this one. They have to act in a way that they do not treat the Ombudsman as if he wants to cross them in some way, or find a cross on their. It's not the way. We investigate, we try to resolve, we mediate, and if it's not possible to come to a solution, then we report. We find our report. Fourth thing you raised, is my office being financially supported? Yes. If the office will increase its remit, which I hope one day it will come. I already said it. I'm fighting for the human rights issue to be part of the remit. Human rights, clearly, not indirectly, clearly a remit of the Ombudsman. Then I will appeal for more funds. But as the position is today, we are adequately in place. Does that answer everything?
Yes, thank you.
Very good. Seeing the eyes of the law students blinking from here, does that mean you want to put a question? Please, introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Judge Zamit McKeon, Mr. Speaker, thank you. My question comes from my experience in pupillage at a local law firm. Oftentimes, professionals are faced with giving advice to clients when they have a case of maladministration, and they are stuck between two choices: either giving advice to go to the Ombudsman, or giving advice to go to court. And the issue is they have to choose. You cannot go to the Ombudsman and then go to court. You cannot go to court and then go to the Ombudsman. And the issue then becomes whether the lawyers cannot obviously give advice whether the recommendation by the Ombudsman will be taken up or not by the government. So they are sort of they always lean towards going to court for a judicial review proceedings, because they know that if they win there, the remedy will be granted, whereas the Ombudsman, it's always a game of chance. So this is something that us as the Malta Law Student Society, we've pushed for some reforms on this point, which as of yet have not been taken up, but we hope that through some more lobbying there might be some progress. But we're curious as to your opinion on this matter. I don't know if Judge Zamit McKeon also has some comments. Thank you.
Rob, I will start on this one myself. I see that you have seen the report of the Ombudsman of the office. The office has already made it very clear that there is no competition between the courts and the office of the Ombudsman, but life can be made easier for people. And you make the life easier for people if you during the period that the Ombudsman is investigating the complaint, the period of prescription should be suspended, not interrupted, suspended. And in that case, you give time. The courts will most certainly tell you a very big thank you, all right? But as far as the citizens' rights are concerned, you have given them time for investigation, and after the investigation, if it is not successful in any way for anybody, that prescriptive period will resume.
In the UK, if somebody goes to court, they cannot then come to the Ombudsman to ask for the Ombudsman to come to a different view. And that's very, very important. Now, the advantage of coming to the Ombudsman is there's no charge. It's a free service, and you don't have to pay legal fees when you go to court, which in the UK are very substantial. There's no getting away from that. Secondly, we can make recommendations about not only resolving the detriment, but making recommendation to the body in jurisdiction to change its behaviour and its policy. Courts tend not to do that. And so there is an advantage of flexibility which the Ombudsman has. The third thing is that we are no slower than the courts. You know, in the UK, the courts have huge backlogs to deal with, so people are not going to get a quicker route. But it's a matter of advice, which you are happily providing, and it will change from case to case depending on what the possibilities are. We say to people, this is my last point, if you want money specifically, don't come to us. You know, we have a scale of recommendations for how much money we ask people to pay. It's not huge in comparison to what the courts can offer. So if you want money, it's better to go to the courts than it is to come to us.
Anything else? Another law student, please.
So, thank you, Judge Zamit McKeon. Thank you, Mr. Roberts, for your insightful comments. I have two questions. So, the first question is that I have noticed that in recent years, our government has composed several grievances boards or other boards which have the same sort of competence or function as the Ombudsman. Does this worry you that these institutions and boards, such as grievances boards, strip away from the jurisdiction of the Ombudsman and subsequently Parliament's function in scrutinizing government decisions? And the second question is this. So it is reported in Europe that Europe is facing a rule of law backsliding and populism is ever increasing. What is the role of the Ombudsman in this regard? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I just answer as it should be answered by looking at the glass half full rather than half empty. The way they were conceived, the grievances boards, way back in 2013 or some more time after that, had a particular role. Now, these boards today have changed their approach. At the office of the Prime Minister, there are three very competent people. They are here, the three of them. Until a few, just weeks ago, they were led by a permanent secretary. Today, they are led by a director general, Orestes here. They are doing a splendid job and cooperating with the Ombudsman. You know how they cooperate with the Ombudsman? At the most sensitive time, when the Ombudsman gives his final report, and before the Ombudsman uses his discretion in case that report is not implemented by the public authority itself to intervene and ask what is happening. That is a role that started, that was kick-started 9 months ago, and it is working very well. And that is a positive approach. So the boards were constituted with a specific purpose when the relations between the office of the Ombudsman and the public service weren't idyllic. Let me put it this way. You ask me, are they idyllic now? We're not here to write poetry. We're here to act. And that is what we'll do. Everybody in his own role. That is my reply.
Could I say two things for two very good questions? On the second issue, it was about populism, did you say? Look, I'm not going to make a speech warning people not to get involved in party politics if they're an ombudsman and then make a comment about populism. What I will say is that there are some brilliant examples of how ombudsmen have resisted populist tendencies in Europe, which we could learn from. I'm thinking of the Polish example of Adam Bodnar, who resisted attacks from a populist government in the fields of LGBT plus rights, the history of Polish war enterprises and so on. And he stood firm against that, and I think that's brilliant. And incidentally, he's now the Minister of Justice in Poland, so it comes around. But on your second point, in the UK, every time there is a crisis in the health service, and there have been many, the government tends to create a new agency to deal with that without getting rid of a former agency. So what we have in health in the UK is a hugely over-regulated arena, which makes coordination very difficult. And that's not a good idea. And I strongly support the principle of integrating into one ombudsman and fewer regulators without reducing the spending on it so that we have a more joined-up, coherent approach to regulation. So I think the government should practice what it preaches in that respect.
Anyone else? Yes, Gordon?
So I'm Gordon Fitz from the Office of the Ombudsman. I believe it was you, Mr. Barron, who said that the Ombudsman should not be involved in party politics, but involved in the political process. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yes. So I can only do that by giving you a concrete example. In the case of Windrush, where citizens from the West Indies came in the early 1960s and were welcomed as British United Kingdom citizens and took part in social life and employment in the UK over 50 years, the government at the turn of the century turned around and said, we're going to create a hostile environment for immigrants, and we're going to get rid of those people who've come here illegally. And unfortunately, the Windrush generation got caught up in that, and they were told that they would have to leave the United Kingdom, which was the only country they belonged to and had known, and they were required to document their employment for the last 40 years and their citizens' rights, which they couldn't do because they hadn't expected that to happen. The Ombudsman's job in that situation is to defend the rights of those citizens whose rights had been abused. It's not the Ombudsman's job to comment on whether or not creating a hostile environment by a political party is an appropriate thing to do. That's a party political question. It's not for the Ombudsman. The consequences of what happened are for the Ombudsman. So I think there is a clear distinction there, and it's very important. And could I just make this point? I've been to Ukraine twice now, which has been an incredible experience for me to see what an ombudsman is like in wartime and the challenges there. And the International Ombudsman Institute decided after 4 meetings and deep discussions to expel the Russian commissioner because she had no distance between herself and the Kremlin. Whatever the Kremlin did, she defended. So she was not behaving as an ombudsman, she was behaving as an apparatchik of the Kremlin or of President Putin. And to our mind, that brought into disrespect the Ombudsman institution, and we took the very serious decision to expel the Russians from the IOI, one of the first bodies to do that. I think that was the right decision to make because we felt she had become too party political. I hope that's clear enough.
We are almost at the very end. I have a question for you. It's rather a statement, but a question with it. This morning, I was viewing LinkedIn, like many of you do, and I saw a very sharp comment by your colleague, and I met him in Birmingham last year, the Housing Ombudsman of the UK. And I'm going to read this out because it's so important, but I want you to comment about it, whether you've seen it or not. This morning, a decent home is a basic human need, but fair and reasonable services which recognize the individual circumstances, especially when vulnerability presents, can be a human right. What do you think of this?
Okay, well, so Rick Blegway is a friend of mine. He's the chair of the Ombudsman Association in the United Kingdom, and he's a good colleague, okay? You're the lawyer, so you would be better able to comment on that than I do. What I think he's doing is justifying his interventions in the failure of public authorities to provide decent housing for people who are entitled to it and pay for it, but they don't get the services that they need, and there have been deaths and illness as a result of that. And I think that's exactly right.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker.
I thank you, Judge Emeritus, and you, of course, Rob, for this enriching session, which we are now coming to a close. But I would like to extend our deepest gratitude to you for traveling to Malta and sharing your invaluable experiences at the UK's Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman. I'm sure that your insights today have enlightened us and inspired us with a deeper understanding of this critical role of the Ombudsman in today's society. I'm sure also you realize how the Maltese people participate very strongly. I mean, just to give you some figures, I mean, in every general election, more than 90% voluntarily of the people go and cast their vote. I mean, your highest percentage was in 2019, 65% of the total population. But I'm just passing this because, as Professor Vassallo mentioned, the importance of having also in the curriculum the subject of the political subject, but I'm sure that most of the Maltese do follow a lot. And also with regards to clearance rate. I mean, if we are to legislate, we have a very strong clearance rate in the Parliament. I mean, the clearance rate of the legislative clearance rate in Malta is the highest now in Europe. I'm sure now you're lagging behind in the UK, because I was reading your reports, which you presented in the Public Administration Constitutional Affairs Committee, which I think was in October of last year. And you remarked correctly that notwithstanding that Parliament was agreeing with the reforms, 8 years after, they still did not legislate about. But that is not our problem, because when we decide, I can assure you, both government and opposition, we have quite a good. But anyway, I must express our sincere appreciation also to the Maltese Ombudsman for of course this important lecture event participation, which this lecture reinforces the significance of our Parliament, highlighting its role beyond the enactment of the laws and the scrutiny of the executive. Definitely, but not last, I must also remark about the participation of all those who participated in this event. And definitely we should continue together to build on the foundation of what I referred to in my earlier introductory speech on transparency, accountability and dialogue, which you mentioned quite a lot, to continue on dialogue even after the investigation of the Ombudsman, which are the essential pillars of our democracy. Now I invite you all for the family photo, and we come to close of this event. Thank you very much.